Okay, we're going to take a quick look at some different kinds of graphs here tonight. Too many lines, so just get rid of that. We can use lots of different kinds of graphs to display data. We're going to look at 5 kinds here tonight. Well, we'll add a 6th one in. It's not in your textbook specifically, but it's one that we'll look at on here, and it makes sense to include it. So, what do we got going on here? We can present data using a variety of forms. I'm going to type some of them in just because you'll be able to actually read them a little bit better. So first off, we're going to say we can present data in a bar graph. You've been building these in the past. Let's look at what else we can have. Well, we can also have a double bar graph. Ooh, we should learn how to spell too. Okay. What else can we have? Well, we can use a circle graph. Right. Obviously, you can write probably not as quick as I can type. So if you need to do anything, pause this. Please make sure you do that. We can also use a line graph. And then we've got one that doesn't show up in the textbook, but it sort of should, is a double line graph. Now, looking at all of these, you should also understand when we have a bar graph or a double bar graph, you could have a triple or a quadruple. The idea with the double compared to the single for all of these, we'll talk about that, but you can have more than one. More than just a double line graph. You could have a triple or a quadruple and so on. And finally, we could also have a pictograph. Right. So it's important to know that different graphs can provide different information and display certain types of data better. Okay, so we're going to look at a few of these graphs, look at how you can possibly build them, also a little bit about what they're good for, maybe some of their disadvantages as well. Alright, so let's take a look here. First of all, a bar graph. So a bar graph is great to use when you want to compare data across categories. Alright, so if you look at the example here, we've got an example of, I'm assuming, a specific class or something like that. And in this class, we took a survey, apparently, and we figured out when each student had their birthday, and we made a plot of that by month. So we can, notice right quickly of the class, we've got kind of a high point. Lots of them have birthdays in May, lots in December, none of them in November. Okay, and the rest sort of spread throughout the year. You'll notice in a bar graph, there's a little gap between each of the bars. You'll notice that we've got the categories across the horizontal axis, and we have the data we're presenting and comparing across them up the y-axis. Right. You'll also notice that there is the same scale all the way up. It's the same distance between 0 and 1 as it is between 6 and 7, because it's the same size. Usually, but not always, you make your scale go just a little bit higher than your highest data point, and then there's a title at the end. Alright, so again, when do we use this? We're comparing data across categories. Alright, let's move on. Double bar graphs. Alright, so let's take a peek. When should we use a double bar graph? Well, we've got There's not a lot of room here, I get that. 2 sets of data. And we're comparing it across the same categories. So 2 sets of data compared across categories. And specifically, the same categories compared across the same. Okay, so yours is not actually going to have this thing where it says line graphs at the bottom of the page, which gives you just a smidgen more room. So in this graph here, we've got individual M&M bags. The title tells us something about it. And it says number of M&Ms, and we had a whole bunch of groups made predictions. That's in blue. And then we counted the actual numbers. And so here we're comparing the two numbers in terms of predictions and actuals for each group. So you notice that the data for each group, the prediction and the actual, they're right next to each other, and then there's a space. Okay. Again, we've got the same scale. We've got the data across, or up the y-axis, and the categories across the horizontal axis. All right. Same thing here. Fruit choices of children. Here we've got the categories or what kind of fruits, and then we've got 2 different colors for 5th graders or 6th graders, and we've got the number of children who picked those ones. So for apple, orange, grapes, we can see pretty quickly that oranges become more popular as you get older, perhaps, or maybe just in that group. And apples are very popular among 5th graders. Okay. So 2 sets of data compared across the same categories. So let's take a look at line graphs here. So when do we use a line graph? Well, we're going to use a line graph when we want to show, we want to look at changes in data over time. We can use a line graph to help us maybe determine trends. So change in data over time. So you can use bar graphs for time, but very often when we have data that's changing over time, when we have data that's changing over time, line graph is a great thing to use. All right, so if we look at this one here, very hard to read the title, Small Town Teens with Cell Phones. Now you'll notice in this one here, the scale is on the side. It's pretty big. And so what they actually did is they put the actual data points, right above each of them. In this case, this is the number of teens with cell phones. So again, our data is on the y-axis, the vertical axis. And then we've got the time across the bottom. Generally, we can say as teens get older, more and more of them have cell phones. We'd have to maybe do some questioning about why that data point is there. Maybe they all got a cell phone at the age of 17 and wrecked it and then had to buy their own when they moved out. I don't know, but that's a question that we could be asking. All right, moving on here then. Double line graph. Basically here it's the same thing, right? Change in, instead of just change in data, change in into categories of data, or two, usually it's going to be similar pieces of data. And again, it's going to be over time. Right, so here we've got book sales, okay. On the y-axis, we've got the number of books. We've got the month, so the time on the bottom. And then here in the key, we've got the title, Roxy Goes to Shanghai and Joseph Eats Mangoes. This sounds like a thrilling book. Yeah, anyways. Again, not much else to say. You can use these to predict trends, perhaps. So looking at this, it looks like Roxy Goes to Shanghai might start to drop, whereas it looks like Joseph Eats Mangoes is probably going to continue going up. Again, that's only with a few data points, but those are the types of predictions we could make. Alright, so circle graphs. Alright, when do we use a circle graph? Well, a circle graph is going to be using to compare categories to the whole with percents. Okay, so compares categories to the whole. And again, we're using, that is supposed to be an N. There we go. Percentages or percents. Alright, so here we've got the whole is all of Devon's homework. And Devon, spelled that way, I would guess this is Devon is a she, spends roughly 28% of her time doing math, 28% of her time doing reading, 22% learning about spelling, and 22% doing other things. So we're finding out that she spends more time doing math and reading than spelling or other stuff. It's nice here because it's visual. You can kind of see the size of the slices of pie will really tell you where more time is spent. Circle graphs might be a little bit less useful if there's lots of different categories, right? If we had 25 categories and they all have a pretty tiny but slightly different slice of the pie, going to be hard there. Maybe then we want to use a bar graph. But again, circle graphs compare categories to the whole using percents. Alright, and last but not least, let's look at pictographs. Okay, so pictographs are best for comparing data that can be easily counted. Okay, so easily counted. And displayed using, oh, that is a terrible U. Counted. And can be displayed with symbols. Lovely. Alright, your assignment is used to do page 13. Well, it starts on page 13 and onwards. Questions 4 to 11, and then come back and do 1 and 2. Okay? Don't do 1 and 2 first. They'll be actually easier to do once you get to the end. Right? Good luck and have fun.